Thank you. We will now resume proceedings of Finance Committee. Please be seated.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Tibbetts, yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, as we're moving on, the Director of Public Works only has, his relevance here only remains with PAH4. What I'm going to do is, with your permission, sir, ask the Public Works Director to answer the questions raised by the member for East End, forgive me, with regards PAH4, and ask for us to take the vote. I'm not so sure that the member will be totally satisfied, but it is what it is, and we'll do the best we can with it. So with your permission, I'll just ask him to outline those answers, sir.
Perfect. Mr. Jones?
Yes, Max Jones, Director of Public Works. I think there were 4 areas raised by Mr. McLean. The first one, the surface wall. Recreation Parks and Cemetery section will arrange a clean-up of that area. The other 3 areas were the Roberts White Hole, Collier's Beach, and the extension of the launch ramp at East End. Our understanding is all of those will require a coastal works application for the works required to the Department of Environment. So subject to our Ministry's direction, we would go ahead and submit those coastal works applications.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, and just to add to that, now that I'm aware of it, the fact of the matter is that we need to make sure that we have specific costs, and once we know what those specific costs are, then we will discuss with the member for East End what the allocations are, what resources we can pour, ask him to help us to prioritize any work to be done in that district. And if any of them are on his priority list, given the resources that we have, then certainly we can move ahead with the applications for the Coastal Works license. I know especially the area in Colliers for where the public beach is, and where I think there's a dock there. I know from the time the member was a minister, he was at this thing trying to get it done. And it's still in limbo, so when I say in limbo, it's where it's at. So hopefully we'll be able to deal with it, but that is the best way that I can propose to move it forward. I certainly can't commit to have the other 3 projects done in the fiscal year coming up, because I just don't know if we have the resources to do all of them.
Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me thank the Minister. He's right. This thing has been outstanding a long time. And DOE has been the stumbling block in this country all along. Always. Ever since. Now, it's one or 2 things. The government is going to do it, or I'm going to show the government why we built Northwood.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. If everyone is satisfied that we received sufficient information on PAH4, we will now proceed to vote on PAH4. All those in favor of PAH4, management of public recreational facilities and cemeteries, for $1,279,117, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no.
Where the cemetery is at? Where the cemetery?
Ladies and
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll quickly recap something that I omitted. And it's just for the sake of I know we all have the information, but for the sake of the listening public. I want to look at the notes to the various outputs, and I think the very first one that has a note to it is PAH3. And I'll read the note to PAH3, and I'll continue on until we've gotten to the PAH11. The note on PAH3 states that the total cost of supplying this output is $4,688,679. However, revenue of $3,250,240 from third parties reduced the cost to Cabinet to $1,438,439. Hence, the appropriation cost is only $1,438,439. The next output with a note is PAH5, Agriculture Regulatory Services. The note to that says that the total cost of supplying this output is $1,781,599. However, revenue of $166,000 from third parties reduces the cost to Cabinet to $1,615,599. Hence, the cost of that appropriation is $1,615,599. PAH6, Agriculture Development Services. The note says that the total cost of supplying this output is $384,812. However, revenue of $12,000 from third parties reduces the cost to Cabinet to $372,812. PAH 9, Management of Land Information. The note says that the total cost of supplying this output is $3,924,829. However, revenue of $827,425 from third parties and $155,000 from statutory authorities and government-owned companies reduces the cost to Cabinet to $2,942,404. Hence, the appropriation for $2,942,404. PAH 10, Management of Government Properties. The note to that appropriation says the total cost of supplying this output is $14,054,461. However, revenue of $302,930 from third parties and $1,030,907 from statutory authorities and government-owned companies reduces the cost to Cabinet to $12,720,624,000. Hence, the cost of the appropriation being $12,720,624. We will now consider PAH 11, Procurement and Maintenance of Government Fleet. And the note to this appropriation says the total cost of supplying this output is $4,601,290. However, revenue of $90,000 from third parties reduces the cost to Cabinet to $4,511,290. The question is, are there any questions in relation to PAH 11, Procurement and Maintenance of Government Fleet, for $4,511,290, found on page 138 of the Annual Plan and Estimates? Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the last Finance Committee, we had some extensive discussions, and they promised, I think they gave a commitment that they would look at leasing some of these vehicles as opposed to buying them outright and do a comparison. Has any of that been done on any of the vehicles that were purchased since that Finance Committee, and can we have a some of the comparative figures. Was what it would have cost government to lease it for 3 or 4 years versus buying it and maintaining it.
Mr. Chairman, sir. First of all, let me say that the members will note that there is approximately roughly $145,000 to $150,000 difference in the proposed allocation for 14-15, that much less than the forecast for 13-14. And just to say to you that the biggest reason for this is not so much more for less as realignment of these outputs, because PAH2, which has already been approved, if we notice, that was up $150,000 more, and that was, most of this difference is because of the realignment of the outputs with DVES. With regards to the member's question, the member will recall at the time there was somebody else as the HOD, and a fair amount of stuff has transpired between last Finance Committee and this one. We now have a new acting head of the Department of Vehicle and Equipment Services in the form of Mr. Richard Sims, who was the Deputy Director of Department of Vehicle and Driver's Licenses. He has been seconded to this post to work along with his deputy, Mr. Stephen Quinlan. And from my quick discussion with Mr. Sims, that is not something that he has attempted to go at yet, but certainly he is receptive to the thought and will begin to make these comparisons. We will not wait until next Finance Committee to speak about this. And once he's able to do the cost-benefit analysis, which is what I think the member was seeking to be found, then certainly we will send that out to everybody, all the members of Finance Committee. I don't want to say that I want to apologize for it, simply because much, as I said, much has transpired, and I don't know if this got lost along the way, because there were many other issues that had to be dealt with. But at least we're now up to where we should be. I can confidently say that Mr. Sims is doing a good job at the helm, and certainly I expect to see much better performance from the department as we move along. But I do give the member that commitment, and we will let him see it as soon as we have something that is tangible to look at.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, to you, Mr. Chairman. One of my concerns is that these processes should be in place and documented so that when there is changes in department heads, there is not a departure therefrom. Or the other thing that we discussed quite a bit, which will probably fall in the same thing, is the cost of the vehicles that are purchased. And we discussed in detail the last time about the possibility of purchasing what I know as a fleet vehicle. The member from East End and myself happened to be at one of the car dealerships quite recently investigating another matter that we're trying to address in our community for the police. And we were told that the vehicle that we were looking at, which we soon found out we couldn't afford, was being purchased for the Petroleum Inspectorate. Here again, I question why and how do we justify for the Petroleum Inspectorate buying a double cab four-wheel drive vehicle with, I think it's a V6 engine with power door locks, power windows, CD, radio, and roll bar. And we were also told that they're going to put $1,000 tool pan on the back. And I just wonder, what is the rationale that DVS uses to decide what kind of a vehicle is bought for purposes like that? Because most of the gas stations here, we don't need four-wheel drive vehicles to get to them. And if for some reason it seems that a lot of these vehicles are upscale to what what in my view, at least they should be for government vehicles. I mean, most places in the world you go, there's a pickup truck, there's a single cab, steering wheel and a gear stick, and if you need the windows, you wind them down or wind them up, and you lock it with the key. And believe it or not, most of the manufacturers still make them, specifically for government.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm waiting for them to confer.
Mr. Chairman, the chief officer will have some input into this matter because this is a matter that is live, and also the acting director would want to say something about the procurement policy, which is what the member is asking about.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. Mr. Jones.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'll perhaps start and Mr. Sims can sort of fill in the gaps. I would wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Miller's point. I agreed with it last year, I agree with it now. I have had discussions with the acting director, and the idea is that we are working on a policy paper which will be put forward to government in conjunction with discussions with the deputy governor, whereby we can obtain firstly a vehicle standardization policy across all of government, and two, to ensure that DVS themselves actually have and can monitor and control the vehicles that each entity purchases. That's not just each entity within my own ministry, but throughout government. At the moment, as people will be aware, each ministry contains or controls their own budget and can effectively acquire the vehicles that they wish to acquire. Going forward, we believe that it's best if that is controlled centrally through DVS.
If the ministry control the funds, then say what his purpose is, what DVS purpose is, then it's simply tender.
And if that bears fruit, that policy, then DVS will play the role they probably should be playing, which is going out to procurement, making sure the procurement process is followed properly, that we get tenders and that we get the appropriate vehicles on fleet. But in reiterating my point, I would agree with Mr. Miller. We do need to get back to the basics with fleet vehicles. We do need to have some discussions with the local suppliers so that we don't get in a situation whereby government departments are buying, as you yourself suggested there, up-spec vehicles from the forecourt. At that point, Mr. Chairman, I perhaps just ask Mr. Sims just to follow up on the procurement process and how he sees DVS's role.
Just before Mr. Sims says what he's saying, because I think we all understood exactly what Mr. Miller was saying. Perhaps a point to address would be all of the options that might be requested. As of now, DVS has no control over what those options are. They simply tender it out according to the request. And I think what Chief Officer is saying is DVS could look at what the requirement is, what purpose the vehicle would serve for the various departments, or the specific department, I should say, and then decide on what is sensible, applicable, but not necessarily to deal with what we might call luxury items, so to speak. But I think that's the point you're making, and we can let Mr. Sims speak to what obtains now and what's the objective.
Richard Sims, Acting Director, Department of Vehicle and Equipment Services. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the member, we certainly have been looking at the fleet option for government, but currently, as it stands with the procurement policy that's in place, it requires us to advertise to the local vendors for these procurements. Now, the issue that we hope to resolve in the future as relates to fleet vehicles, we currently can't dictate what we want, unfortunately, when you put out these tenders, because it's a general tender.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think we get in the cart before the horse here. We were given substantial assurance last Finance Committee that one of the major roles of DVs, because we remember the discussion, Mr. Minister, about purchasing 80 vehicles, and we were told, oh, no, we're not buying no 80 vehicles, right? Because we got 20 to 30 here now. But part of the role that we were told of DVs was to assist the various departments and ministries in the selection of the vehicle. I think the selection and the determination of the type of vehicle, which is what I call which I believe should be what the industry calls a fleet vehicle, which is a vehicle with minimum options, minimum costs, and minimum cost to operate it, should be done prior to it going to tender. I don't think it's going to have a lot of effect if you continue to allow them to specify power windows, power door locks, right?
But if I may, that's exactly the point that the Chief Officer was making, is the procurement policy that it obtains now is one which needs addressing, which will take care of the situation that you're speaking about, and that's being developed as we speak. As soon as that's developed and we can get it through Cabinet and get it approved in consultation with the Deputy Governor, then that problem will fall away. One of the other situations that also exists is depreciation is not something, if I may say it like this, that is appreciated in the right way. And we have had some very glaring examples since Mr. Sims has taken over, where repairs on certain pieces of equipment, heavy equipment especially, over a 2-year span, for instance, the cost of the repairs is worth 3 and 4 times more than what a new piece of equipment would cost. And it absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, understanding that there are budgetary constraints, but of course we need to plan and plan a lot better so that we get a bigger bang for the buck, and at the same point in time, we have our equipment in good order most of the times, and at the end of the day, it will not cost more. But the point that you make, Mr. Miller, through you, Mr. Chair, is a very valid point, and that would certainly save noticeably thousands of dollars on an annual basis, and allow and help to allow that the fleet could be handled in a much better fashion and have depreciation work in the proper fashion that it should work. Because in the whole budget process, the depreciation factor is always calculated in the process. It's a matter of utilizing the whole system properly.
To you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I opposed the setting up of the central funding scheme back in the 80s for the same reason. Because you remember the word central funding scheme. We were promised then that we were going to be doing exactly that, and we were going to have a seeking fund and repairs to replace the vehicles and all that sorts of stuff. And it morphed into DVs, and it's gotten more expensive, and we're getting less product. So I look forward, and I don't know if the Chief Officer could tell us when he expects to have this policy in place, and whether that policy will be put in place before any new vehicles are bought under this budget that we are approving today.
If it's possible, we'd like it.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just to answer to Mr. Miller. Just referring back to the Minister's point, obviously I don't pass the policy, Cabinet will pass the policy. But in terms of getting a draft policy in place, I would look forward to getting that completed in conjunction with the Acting Director within the next 6 months.
Oh, no, sir, 6 months, no. No. Can't accept 6 months, sir. This is, you should be able to do this by Friday. Put the policy in place because it shouldn't need cabinet position. This is an internal policy and it shouldn't have to go to cabinet. This is not regulations or law. And I mean, remember now, you went down this road last year. You basically promised us this policy last year in a different form. So I don't think that 6 months is acceptable, sir. I'm sorry. In 6 months, every department in government that needs a new vehicle under this budget will have bought it. So it'll be a total waste to put the policy in place after that, except for the next budget. So it has to come in place before this budget comes into effect. And anybody who can't wait, even if you told me you'll have it in place by the 31st of July, I would accept that. But this is not a difficult thing to do.
Through you, Mr.
And I can vouch for Mr. Sims that he's capable of doing the policy for you, sir, and I volunteer to help him.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, appreciate your offer of assistance there, Mr. Miller. It is a little more difficult because the government's financial regulations have each ministry controlling their own budget at the moment. And I, as Chief Officer, the Minister or the Director of DVS have no control over other ministries' budgets. So that is one major obstacle we've got to get over in terms of getting the policy approved. I do hear your comments about the urgency. We will do everything we can to expedite that process. But I have to say so with all due respect, there's no way we can get that done before the start of this new financial year.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just
sir.
so that Mr. Miller will be aware that we are on the same page. There is no question as to whether we would want to delay it or not. And I'm glad the Chief Officer pointed out where the difficulty lies. Not difficulty, but hurdles. And I don't, to be truthful, I don't believe that everybody who is part and parcel of the decision-making process is on the same page as the page that we're looking at right now, and we have to make sure that we get past that. What I will commit, through you, Mr. Chair, to the member, is that we will have the policy ready for Cabinet by July 31st. And then I take the responsibility of seeing how fast we can get it through.
No, you can't ask for more than that, is it?
Mr. Chairman, that's acceptable from the Minister, because I know he'll get it done. And as I said, I can vouch for Mr. Sims that he will have the capability to do it.
Mr. Chairman, if...
Mr. McLean, yes, sir.
Thank you. I thought all them stumbling blocks in government had gone. You remember when I was trying to do the same thing, Minister? You remember?
What amazes me is that you expect everything to be different now.
No,
But I don't mean, I say that in jest. I understand.
I'm giving you the benefit of the
I
doubt
understand
because,
exactly what you say.
because those stumbling blocks are all gone. The one that stopped me. You remember. You remember.
Okay, Mr. McLean. Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one of the other things that needs to be done is a policy on vehicle use within government. Because every person, any brother and sister and nephew and niece driving around with government logo on the side. And there is I don't understand why Cabinet cannot make a decision and say, that's the policy. Managers, only chief officers and heads of department will be able to drive vehicles. Done. Finish. And if they don't do it, the first one you find dragging their boat, well, they going home.
Mr. Chairman, that too is will be part and parcel of the policy that we're speaking about to be put forward, to be agreed upon. What happens right now, for instance, speaking of my own ministry, we have our own policy in place which speaks to who drives what, making sure that all of the vehicles are with proper labelings to ensure that it is, sorry?
I said that one talk about all that, they put this many times over, and it keep repeating itself.
Well, anyway, just to say to you, I really do not know if there is a global policy in effect at present. In fact, I don't know of one that is a global policy in effect. But that is something that we will be pursuing along with the procurement policy.
Thank you.
One last one on this, Mr. Chairman, on a different subject.
Understanding that not our full responsibility, but taking.
Do we have a gas fuel management system up there by DVES now? That gas boy, because you know how many administration they'll go jail for that?
Yes. We have a system in place now, Mr. Chairman, but just to let everybody know, as I said when I was making my contribution, what obtains presently is that the 1996 contractual arrangement expired in 2011. From 2011, it has been continuing on a monthly basis. Prior to Mr. Sims coming on board, we had made several attempts after the elections to begin the process. I have met with Rubis. I have told them that they must not expect any similar arrangement which they had in the past with government, and that the whole situation will be going for open tender as soon as we possibly can. In doing that, I had asked for them to tell us what the depreciated value of the equipment that was on our site, which belonged to them or belongs to them, is at present, so that we can determine whether we want them to remove that equipment and for us to replace it, or whether the equipment is in good enough condition that with some refurbishment it would have a reasonable lifespan left on it, that we could put it out for tender. We've now had response from them as to the value of it. I'm just awaiting the legal opinion now, and last week we asked for that legal opinion as to what's the best way forward to us, for us to go to the route to take, whether we should simply say to them, it's going to cost you more to remove this equipment and remediate the place back to its original condition. So we are simply going to commandeer the equipment, tell you bye-bye, and you can bid when we're ready. But I want to make sure that we can do that. And I say that openly because it ain't no secret to them. So as soon as we possibly can, we will be creating the tender document to send it out for any qualified entity to bid on for the supply. Just to take this opportunity, although it's a bit repetitious, but just to remind everybody that there have been those who say that we should simply allow government vehicles to be filled with fuel at the retail stations, and that's a horror story when it comes to auditing and making sure that, so that's not, besides that, it's not the best price. So although we've thought about that, we realize that that is not a preferred option. So I would expect that by the time this calendar year is up, we will have a new system in place, a new contract in place, and it certainly will not be a long-term contract like the previous one was, and it'll be one that is open for, I wouldn't say all and sundry, but all qualified bidders to tender. And also to ensure that the system that we have is one which can't be tampered with and is as secure and foolproof as possible.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's a question I've been asking because I've seen a trade, similar trade running through most of the ministries, and that is that there is reduced or increased service and reduced budget. And I expect the same answer, but I want it documented so the minister can elaborate on it. This one is...
Is this PAH 11?
Yes, PAH 11.
Yeah, but I said from the very beginning, I don't know.
4.65 million and 4.51 million.
Yeah, I said from the beginning, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know whether the member was in the room or not, but I said from the beginning that this $140-something thousand difference is a realignment of DVES outputs, where you will, if you look on PAH2, you will see that there was a similar increase in that allocation compared to this decrease in this allocation, and it's all because there's a realignment of the outputs. And the new management, when they make their assessment, as they've made their assessment, have determined that that amount of outputs should be under PAH2 as compared to PAH 11, where it was last year. So this is not one of them where it's more for less. It's just simply that the outputs have been realigned onto PAH2. Therefore, the accompanying sums of money were put in PAH2 and taken out of PAH 11.
But even on this one, there is still increased work. I hear what you're saying, but on this one there's some increases in work. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, you can move on.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, I inadvertently, okay.
Not a problem, sir. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the minister talking about the opportunity government is taking to put back out to tender its fuel supply, and that's all well and good. 2 or 3 points off the wholesale price can mean a lot of money for government.
It is the third largest market.
Absolutely.
From
When we can't use sun or windmill there, we can use that. Yeah. But I really wanted to hear, my question was surrounding an explanation or commitment on the use of fuel, really, the management of use of fuel at the point of distribution.
yeah,
Because without a doubt, there is still abuse in that arena, and that can make the Minister for Finance cringe, and it will at some stage. And that's where I'm at, because we need, in that procurement process to get change or get better supply, we also need to have a requirement in there for them to produce a distribution system that is foolproof. Now, if we don't, and we come back with the same one we had, all that says is jumbled numbers across the page, and nobody can read that, not even the computer it came out of.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if we can have some commitment on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, let me just read a paragraph for everyone's benefit from the briefing for the fuel briefing for the 14-15 budget. To manage the fueling facility, DVS currently uses a software system known as GasBoy to manage and keep track of fuel usage. Only one time I'm going to use that word. The current software is a standalone system. However, it is lacking in its ability to keep controls of usages and set limits. Therefore, in order to keep proper controls, we are in the process of upgrading to a better software that can issue vehicle identification, authorize vehicle identification, set limits and restrictions to vehicles and drivers, conduct reporting on fuel management per day, per week, and per month. The new upgrades to the software will increase the controls at the gas pumps and will allow DVS to be in compliance with all internal audit requirements as it relates to the fuel controls. So management is very aware of the difficulties and are in the process. By the time we have the bids out, we will have that situation in a secure fashion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may pass a word of advice to my good friend. Do not buy a system to put in there. Require whoever gets that new contract that it be part of their system.
That it be part of their system?
Yes. They're going to provide pumps. They're going to provide the different.
To be very truthful with you, I am not inclined to make any one of them supply in it. That's not to argue with you, but I'm not inclined to have part of the contract being them supplying pumps and tanks and all like that. I would much prefer for that to be our responsibility, and really all they supply us is fuel. But I'm not against what you just suggested. My whole difficulty with the whole affair is I want to make sure that we are in charge.
Yeah, but Mr. Chairman, part of that procurement of your fuel, bulk fuel, you should include the provisions for them to provide pumps because of compatibility with the different systems. They should be required, or you should ask them to provide pumps and the software included in the because if you go buy the pumps, you're going to get.
Your point is taken, yeah. Your point is taken. But remember what I said earlier on now. What is there now? We are hoping, I'm not talking about systems. I'm talking about the equipment. What is there now? We've had the professionals look at it. And if reasonably cost upgrades can give it a 10-year lifespan, then it's certainly worth our while to keep it for 10 years and have the use of it for 10 years while we put a new system in place. And perhaps, if that's how it ends up, a new supplier.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I know the minister and I were in cabinet together. However, there were things he did that I didn't know anything about, and there were things I did that he didn't. Likewise. The genesis of the problems that we had there came from those pumps. They put those pumps there, and they were first-generation pumps. They were not the advanced electronically controlled pumps. Thus, the software, no software was working on it. The only one that was spitting out some numbers
The gas
Well, it's the
Roy.
old gas, boy. I
I
don't
thought
want
we
to
weren't
use
gonna
the
use
word
our
again.
name again.
I don't want to
Both
use
of
it.
us just did. Sorry.
But that's why I'm saying take a look at that to see if they have come to third, fourth, fifth generation pumps now.
Fully
with
appreciate what
compatible
the member is
software.
saying.
Yes, okay.
Okay,
Your comments have not gone by the wayside.
thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of PAH 11, procurement and maintenance of government fleet for $4,511,290, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. PAH 12, handling of dangerous substances, $217,304, found on page 139 of the annual plan and estimates.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can the minister say whether there have been inspections carried out in the past year in respect to the actual compounds, and whether there have been any reports on any spills that, and whether there is any seepage into the ground and those compounds. Compounds meaning the importers, the two tanks.
You're talking about the bulk distributors.
Yes, the two importers.
You're not speaking to service stations and such alike, just the distributors.
Importers. South Sound. Importers.
Mr. Chair, I would ask Mr. Monroe to respond.
Good afternoon, Duke Monroe, Chief Petroleum Inspector with the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure. Mr. Chair, in regards to the question the Honorable Member asked as it relates to inspections, we have been constrained, but what we have done was to seek to prioritize inspections we were going to carry out at the various facilities. And naturally, we focused on the major importers, the major two terminals. And in relation to whether there were spills at these facilities, there were no new spills or no new development within the last year that we were made aware of. There are some historical issues that are currently being addressed and action in collaboration with the Water Authority. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, in regards to these historical matters, you are collaborating with the Water Authority, but you don't know for certain any quantities on those of the spills and those concerned. Now, there have been reports over the years, and I don't know if there's been anything much more than that, but there have been reports of the spills and not official. Well, nothing that said to us otherwise that anything had been done. But there have been these spills, and there's an accumulation, quite a bit of accumulation of the fuel in the ground, in those compounds. So you haven't, sorry, Mr. Chairman, but through you haven't been able to get to that point. You say in this past year, nothing like that. What you found, or what you're doing, is in collaboration with the Water Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to the question, whether the quantities and the state of affairs right now at those terminals, whether they're known, yes, they are known. They have been coming through, as you mentioned, from a number of years, and we're working towards cleanup levels. So in terms of the quantities and its impact and the impact it's having on the ground, we're working to get it to a level where we know it's satisfactory. And because Water Authority being the custodian of the groundwater, we need to ensure that the levels there does not pose a significant threat to groundwater. So that's why we've been working in collaboration. When we expect to achieve that, once we get to that. In terms of, Mr. Chair, in terms of when we expect to get to that level where it's cleaned up, we can set target times for the levels that we want to see, the various concentrations and stuff of the byproducts and products that are in fuel. We can actually set a timeline, but there are other factors that can impact that in terms of when you're doing the remediation work. If there is like groundwater and there's dilution of the product and it moves, there's plumes and stuff that can move varying places, it's going to also pose a challenge. So we can't lock it down, but what we certainly are locking down is the fact that we need to get it down to certain levels where it doesn't pose a threat to the environment.
But you have found out through the same historical data that there are thousands of gallons there.
Mr. Chair, in terms of the quantities, I do not have those figures on me right now, but it's information that I can obtain to understand.
But you haven't got to that point since your appointment, or?
I don't have that information on me right now, but
Can you provide it?
we can certainly work
Thank
towards
you
that,
kindly.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Mr. McLean,
Thank you, sir.
Mr. McLean, then Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, you're the Mr. Monroe now that I talked to. Okay. Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. I wonder if Mr. Monroe can tell us how comfortable he is with the above storage facilities in this country. And I want you, above ground, I want you to expand on your remit to have these things x-rayed and in that arena.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add to the previous question too that we're getting full cooperation from these operators, the two bulk operators, in terms of the remediation work. So something that we're optimistic that's going to be taken care of in the shortest possible time. So, thank you. So, Mr. McLean's question, in terms of where we are with the above ground storage tanks across the islands, there are some concerns. We have been doing our best in terms of our inspections, but we have been somewhat affected in that area. We have set out, what we are doing is to try to tackle this from installations right now, because what is out there currently. So what we're doing now is trying to nail down at the point of installation all the requirements that we're going to need to have standard going forward. What we do not know, we cannot really assess currently, and there is some amount of information out there that we do not know. But the industry has been very cooperative in terms of working with us to bring compliance, but as I say, what we do not know may be a bit of a risk to us currently.
Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Monroe tell us, if you know, on the main bulk storage in this country, when was the last time those tanks were x-rayed?
Mr. Chair, through to Mr. McLean, the inspections we've been doing over the last few years, well, since I came on board and based on the history that I've obtained, we've been doing visual inspections. The x-raying of the tanks that you refer to is part of API programs that most of these companies do subscribe to. We have not been verifying those inspections, but it's something that we needed to enforce legally. Okay. Now, legally, we we were at a place where we ought not to be, but that is being addressed as we speak, and is being addressed urgently. It is something that we raised, and I've gotten the full commitment that we're going to move aggressively in that area to ensure that we have the legal backing that we need, which was not the case prior to what we're currently working on, to ensure that what we require can certainly be what obtains out in the field. So in terms of x-rays, we don't have the information because it's something that we have not been demanding from the industry, because legally we were not at that place where we could have made those demands on them. So we have been doing our inspections, visual inspections, on these equipment on an annual basis.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe, but you will agree with me that those installations have been around 30,
Probably
40 years,
Yes, sir.
and our most vulnerable spot on those just happens to be sitting on the ground. Condensation up from and down to.
Yes, sir.
And that steel is not for a lifetime. And in the absence of x-rays and total inspection, the risk is too high. Will you agree with that?
Mr. Chair, I certainly do agree with the member's point in regards to where we are. In regards to the status of those equipment, this honorable house may know that we did have the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law that was enacted in 2003. One critical component of that law was to have operating permits, which will enable and empower us to go out there and do inspections, making those facilities legal. As we speak currently, those are not in place, and in recent discussions and consultation with legal, we found out that it was a very highly undesirable situation, because in actual fact we are unable to enforce any requirements in any codes as it relates to the petroleum sector. So we're working to fix that post haste. Yes. Yes, and we have brought this to the attention of ministry, and we had an urgent meeting that was called, and the cabinet papers are being worked on for approvals, and we'll try to move those through the legal review process as quickly as possible so that we can have those regulations in place. I would dare say within the shortest possible time, hopefully within a month.
Mr. Chairman, a couple more questions. Mr. Monroe, do you on regular basis inspect and manage and oversee all those importers other than the two main importers of fuel, especially those who sell to others, has customers?
Mr. Chair, there's a bit of an issue as it relates to importers of fuel because of the way the trade and business license law is structured based on how our law is structured. So what we currently do is any entity that is involved in petroleum handling, storage, transport, importation, we do provide guidelines to them. We do oversee what they do, but more recently we've been seeing an increased number of importers, and it is another concern area that we've raised with the ministry, and we're working to address that. I would also say that importation is not explicitly covered under our law, and it's something that we are looking at. But the mere fact that they're involved in petroleum activities on the island, we are involved in terms of setting some requirements for them. But it comes back to the... yes, but it all comes back to the regulations not being in place so that we can really enforce. But as I said earlier, the industry has been very cooperative to the extent that we would, well, not to the full extent that we would like to, because there's some of the, I would say, the major players too that we do have some concerns with. Hence the reason why we needed to push through with the laws and the various regulations.
Mr. Chairman, I'll give it up after this question, but this is an opinion question based on your experiences. Do you consider the movement of fuel, which is in the dangerous category, particularly the volatile ones, gasoline, diesel, kerosene, aviation. Do you consider those more risky to move from ship to shore, back to ship? More risky than ship to shore?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify the question, you're inquiring as to whether there are more risk involved in ship to shore and then back to, okay, ship to shore transfers and then back from shore to ship. Whether I consider that to be more risky than just transferring from ship to shore. Generally, the handling and the transfer of these materials will pose risk. So the increased transfer of those activities will certainly bring with it an increased risk because it's more hands-on activity, more stuff happening that something can possibly go wrong. The industry has, however, gotten to the point where it's very mature in terms of ensuring that these risks are managed or minimized, but it still can happen because it's an increased amount of activity. So, all in all, I would say that yes, there's going to be increased risk, but once we have the built-in mechanisms in place, it should be adequately managed and the risk should be mitigated as far as possible.
Yes, but that is, whilst the industry has put some mitigating factors in place to manage it and mechanisms, it is when it's going back on to a ship that you don't know whether that ship is ready, it's clean or not. That's where the risk is exponentially higher.
Mr. Chair, that is correct, and we certainly have to put all of these systems in place. Excuse me, all of the standards of care that we would refer to in the industry to ensure that is taken care of. But there's so many things that can go wrong, admittedly. So that's something that we have to pay careful attention to.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. Mr. Miller, you had a question, sir?
Yeah, true, Mr. Chair. My concern is the timeline involved here. I mean, we're hearing about a 2003 law that we don't have regulations for that gives you the ability to inspect and enforce. And while you keep repeating that the industry is cooperating with you, I'm still concerned that this seems to be taking a long, long time, and we're still talking about months before we get the regulations that will give you any authority to do these inspections. And that's my concern, and listening to the answers that you have before of some of the risks that more than likely exist already. But I'm very concerned in the timelines. Is there anything can be done to narrow the timeline?
Mr. Chairman, sir, through you to Mr. Miller, I want to reassure you, sir, that I have had my heebie-jeebies for quite a while. And I say that you will understand what I'm saying. It is unfortunate, but I will say nothing else but the truth as well, you know. This is something that has only come to our attention in very recent times. It was something I did not know. And after legal advised CPI and they advised the ministry, we set about very urgently to move with it. We have now agreed on the amendments that have to be made. the paper for cabinet being prepared. I'm going to ask Premier to allow it to go through very swiftly, because I don't think there are going to be any questions as to whether we should or shouldn't do it. Once the regulations are in place, I'm going to ask the chief officer just to speak a little bit to the HR situation, because there was also some difficulty with that within the CPI, and I can give you every assurance that we are as concerned as you could possibly be, and want to get everything in place to be able to act as swiftly as we possibly can, and we're working towards that, sir.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, because can the minister say why the importers themselves, the bulk storage companies themselves, have not advocated for some of this for their own protections, insurance risk and all this other stuff? And in their process of cooperating, it doesn't seem like they've been very cooperative, other than doing as little as possible that the CPI wanted them to do without the law that says they had to do it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. It is, I don't want to be misunderstood, but what you're saying is exactly correct, should be the case, but it's easier for you to say than for them to do, because there's that competition, there's money drives business, and all of those factors, and we, as a regulator, have to ensure that compliance levels are there. And I wish not to make them sound like the evildoers, but I will say this, that we consider it a necessity, not just because it's a new discovery to us, but to have these regulations in place to ensure that compliance is there, because I am not confident, based on the results we have now, that they would in any way help to self-regulate. I've given up on that. I'm not attempting that anymore, not even thinking about it, so you can understand the course that we're taking.
I guess the other question I would have from a safety point of view, are there, I believe you call them berms, that exist around these storage tanks, are they adequate to contain a leak from one of these tanks at the moment? Or is it likely to overspill the bounds into the communities?
Mr. Chair, through to Mr. Miller, the facilities that currently have spill containment berms, they are adequate, because one of the difficulties we've had with persons understanding is that the capacity of those are not really to contain all of the tanks spilling, but just the largest tank within that array of tanks, so that berm will only contain one tank because of the probability of all of the tanks failing. So they're adequate, and we do inspect those two to ensure that they're holding up. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just to quickly say, I wish not to portray the impression that there is a situation of, there is an adversarial situation between them and either ministry or the CPI, nothing like that. But I certainly want to impress the point that it is ministry's considered position that we must have these regulations in place, and we must be able to enforce these regulations to ensure, as far as possible, the safety of the people of the Cayman Islands.
Thank you. Are there
Mr. Chair, just to quickly address the human resource issue, just so that the picture can be painted.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Just to advise, by way of fairness, Mr. Monroe has been doing a sterling job over the last few months during a difficult time when, due to staff leaving, he's been holding the fort on his own, which has unfortunately delayed things somewhat in terms of pushing forward some of these draft regulations. Just to inform and reassure members that, as Minister said earlier, we are dealing with this as a priority matter, and I have ensured that we are getting the staffing levels up to the appropriate level with all speed. In that regard, we have a new Assistant Petroleum Officer joining on July 8th, and we have also got a third member who's on secondment from Department of Planning who's already started. Just wanted to add that by way of confirmation how seriously Ministry is taking this particular issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay. All those in favor of PAH 11? Sorry, PAH 12? Handling of dangerous substances, $217,304 standing part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
Before we progress any further, I'll just make the announcement now that due to concerns of some members, we will be going till 8 o'clock tonight.
Oh, shoot.
Anyone not caring to stay can leave, and we don't have a quorum, we'll stop.
Mr. Chairman, we made plans for 7, but
And I would ask all members, if they are concerned about finishing in time, please spend sufficient time in the chamber to finish in time, if I may make that comment.
I didn't realize that. They'll later change her mind.
I said that, sir. We will go till 8 o'clock or until we no longer have a quorum. And that will be the case until we have made sufficient progress. Minister Rivers, I know your situation. Thank you. Moving on to PAH.
Mr. Chair, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, there's only one more subject for agriculture, which is PAH 17.
Okay.
If you don't mind, could we do that now so that agriculture could be released and then we could go on to
Yes,
the
sir.
rest?
Yes, sir. We will now move to PAH 17. Services to farmers for $2,205,671. Found on page 145 of the annual plan and estimates. PAH 17, page 145.
I didn't know that we were going to late. Come.
Are there any questions?
he's a good man.
Are there any questions on PAH 17?
Huh?
The note on PAH 17 states that the total cost of supplying this output is $4,001,171. However, the revenue of $1,795,500 from third parties reduces the cost to Cabinet to $2,205,671. Are there any questions? Mr. Eden and then Mr. Miller.
Not a question, just a comment. I have had the opportunity to utilize this facility as a farmer, and I must say that it's a very credible and courteous job. The people that do this, committed and dedicated, and at a very high standard. Just want to thank the minister and his department for this.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chairman, all I can say to Mr. Eden before Mr. Miller asks his question is help me to get a little bit more funds and we'll do even better.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the minister or the director of agriculture should just outline, particularly for the visiting public, what is necessary to become a registered farmer and some of the benefits that being a registered farmer gets from the agricultural department.
Through you, Mr. Chair. To become a registered farmer, well, actually there's an application process. You could become a commercial or a non-commercial farmer. So, depends on the size of your holding. You could be categorized in as a commercial farmer or a non-commercial farmer. The benefits of being a commercial farmer is that you get the highest subsidized prices that the Department of Agriculture has. At this point, there's a flat rate on livestock feed, and the ministry has just signed off on a three-tiered pricing for fertilizers and that will be the same with insecticides, where the commercial farmers would pay the lowest price of the three. So it would be a commercial price, a non-commercial price, and then any other person, a walk-in. So one of the other benefits would be that we would write and authorize letters to immigration and to customs, but that would also be with the ID. So once there is the ID that the the other member was asking about, when they take this ID, it would show the type of registration that they have. So that's really, in a nutshell. Well, I don't have the full list for the criteria. It's not, but a flavor of it.
Some of the things you remember.
Yeah, it's acreage of land, number of animals, acreage of crops, right, the number of trees. So those things would be all hooked at, so that the standard, so that you'll have standards for a commercial or a non-commercial.
And what about the department's response to the various categories?
Well, in terms of the response to the various categories, the commercial farmers would obviously get the priority of attention. Oh, and one I left out, they would get the benefits of services offered at the department, primary like land clearing, crop spraying. Those would be the ones that they'll have access to over and above the backyard or the non-commercial farmer. But with respect to livestock care, the vets would attend to any call for a productive animal in agriculture, because they don't discriminate regardless of numbers or of size. They just carry out the vet calls.
And the acreage doesn't have to be owned. It could be either lease or just a written agreement to farm it.
Yeah, leased, but with a written document to show.
If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to the vote. All those in favor of PAH 17, services to farmers, $2,205,671, standing prior to schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. PAH 13, provision of planning services, $72,212, found on page 140 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. McLean? (13) and 14? Okay, by all means. We will also consider, along with PAH 13, we will consider PAH 14, management of planning applications for $2,792,822, found on page 141 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller? And the note to that, PAH 14 on page 141 says, 142, the note says that the total cost of supplying this output is $3,138,322. However, the revenue of $345,500 from third parties reduces the cost to cabinet to $2,792,822. Are there any questions? PAH 13, PAH 14, together.
Mr. Chairman, just a query. I note, Mr. Chairman, that recently we had a situation in our district with a house that was designated as a halfway house. And I understand that there was not planning agreement for that changeability. And I'm just wondering, with all the good work that planning is doing, how this sort of in-house between two departments, whether we will see anything that can stop that sort of project going ahead without planning permissions. I recognize we're already past the relevant ministry that deals with halfway houses, but the question is still, I think, very important because it rests, as I said, also hits or impacts on the planning department. And so the question that I would have is whether the Department of Planning from their end can do anything in this regard where, and I guess if they don't know, they don't know. So it really behoves ministries like the Home Affairs Ministry, which deals with the community affairs, to be on the lookout for that sort of thing.
Thank you. Mr. Tibbetts, who will answer from your side?
Mr. Chair, we have the Director of Planning who is up to speed with the goings-on of the issue that the Leader of the Opposition is talking about, and he will answer the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Haroon Pandey, Director of Planning with the Department of Planning.
Thank you.
In response to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question, sir, in the first instance, when the department became aware of the issue, we took the matter to the Central Planning Authority, who promptly issued an enforcement notice to cure, and that notice has now been served on the relevant parties, requiring them to cure the breach or to apply for planning permission.
Thank you. Did you hear this?
Maybe you better repeat that. I was just following the news on some of it.
Quickly, Mr. Pahando, please repeat that quickly, and then we'll move on
Sorry,
to another
Mr.
question.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Just to repeat, when the department became aware of the matter with the halfway house, we took the matter to the Central Planning Authority, who promptly issued an enforcement notice, which has now been served on the relevant parties, requiring them to cure the breach, and if they wish to proceed with that use, to acquire planning permission.
Mr. Chairman, as I said in opening, I'm not questioning planning because as I know from my complaint that planning acted properly when they were informed. But I am speaking from the point of this so-called joined-up government. And that's been something on and on for years, how we becoming joined up and, you know, everybody's supposed to know what everybody's doing, yet we're still finding situations like that. Now, I know how difficult it is, but I wanted to get an understanding if anything was being done to ensure or try to ensure that that sort of situation is not going to be something that we have to deal with on an everyday occurrence. Because it wouldn't be just halfway houses, it would be other things, huh?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just making an observation, because I understand what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is saying, but surely it shouldn't be the Ministry of Home Affairs' responsibility to tell an agency that they have to acquire planning permission. I would think that the agency has certain responsibilities. The Home Affairs Ministry would be looking at the policies and the programs. Not that I don't understand what the Leader of the Opposition is saying, but I'm not so sure that the responsibility lies with the ministry.
With what, which ministry then, Mr. Chairman?
Sorry?
Which ministry? Your ministry or you?
No.
Or on Home Affairs?
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that what the Minister of Home Affairs would be looking at, in my view, would be the policies and programs, not whether or not they have planning permission. And I would think that the responsibility rests with these individuals or this group.
No.
Okay.
Well,
Matter of
look at it
opinion, I
whatever way
guess.
you want to look at it, but Mr. Chairman, if somebody is going to put down a program and Home Affairs is made aware of it, or Community Affairs is made aware of it, then that's where the responsibility lies.
I think, gentlemen, I think we've seen this before with other areas, not identical but similar. We need to move to a stage where before anyone receives government funding, we should ensure that we've completed the checklist, that they've complied with whatever requirements
That's
they
the
should
point.
meet. We've seen this before, and we can't keep going over the same road.
No.
We,
And while we're at it, Mr. Chairman, we're not against, as far as we're concerned as West Bay representatives, we're not against a project as such, because we want to be able to do what we can to help people. However, we do have three other, there's two off of Hale Road and one off of Barker's Road or Birch Tree Hill Road, whichever you want to call it. Three already. And now you're going into let's call it an exclusive neighborhood that people, homes and everything else is going to be impacted with government, with government assistance, with government funding.
Thank you. That is the point. If government is funding something, we need to ensure that it has met whatever requirements should be met under the law. I think we need to move to that stage, and then we will not have these types of issues arising and questions being asked as to, does the left hand know what the right hand is doing?
And I take this opportunity to say, while we don't want to interfere in a process, we certainly stand behind our responsibility as elected representatives. We have an area, we have people, we have homes already in the district, and you got people coming in that are putting up this program depending on government's assistance and not making anybody know much what they're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you had a question, sir.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister. Now that he has the planning director, I raised an issue earlier about the authenticity or the accuracy of surveys, and it was kind of suggested that the planning should be the person that deal with it. So I want to give the planning officer an opportunity to clear his name, because he's fully aware, I am aware, that we met with planning in September last year, and I'm also aware that the director of planning referred the matter to the Lands and Survey, and he determined when we met with him that that was a course of action to be taken, and that he referred it. So I think he needs an opportunity to clear his name.
I didn't know that his name needed clearing, but certainly I'm quite happy to allow Mr. Pandui to speak to the issue, assuming that he is quite sure of the issue that you're quite sure of the issue he's talking about. Feel free.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you, sir. In relation to the matter that the member raised, the high water mark survey was submitted to the department as a part of a planning application, and it was considered and formed a part of the consideration for that application, in which planning permission was granted. When I did have the meeting with the member and representatives who brought the issue to light, the matter was taken to the Central Planning Authority, who at the time resolved that it was a matter best dealt with at the Lands and Survey Department, as it involved the authenticity or being called in question of the survey. And that was when the matter was transferred to the Chief Surveyor for his input.
Mr. Miller, is there a follow-up question or?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that through you and the Minister, the Director of Planning, is he aware of a communication for Thursday, June the 5th at 9 a.m. that came to him and was copied to myself and Mr. Vasquez of Lands and Survey Department?
Mr. Chair, I am aware of that communication, sir.
So, Mr. Chair, so that it doesn't be left hanging in the air, understanding all of that and being made aware of that now, through the Chief Officer, we will make sure to look to see where it's at. And I think what this specific situation, which of course I was only made aware of through the committee and its deliberations today, this may well speak to some gap in a policy issue with regards to how matters are handled. And if that is the case, we will certainly determine what that is, so that not only can this specific instance be dealt with, but so that in the future we don't have a repeat of the specific instance. But certainly, if I could get a copy of what the member speaks to, then we will act on it, definitely.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, I will bring on Wednesday morning a complete copy of all the surveys, all the aerial maps that have been submitted to government, all of the representation, and a complete package for you 10 o'clock Wednesday morning. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to vote. Mr. McLean, you have a question, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I know the member, Mr. Pandue, I have inundated him with all kinds of stuff on that project in East End. But I would like to ask him if he currently has any enforcement on, not on the hospital, but on the surrounding properties, and if they have adhered to those enforcements.
Mr. Chairman, at present, we do not have any active enforcements related to the project in question. The compliance officer makes regular visits to the site, and in the hopes of being proactive in preventing the need for enforcement action to be taken to address any breaches of planning control. The site was visited last week. Some areas of concern were noted. Those were passed on to the landowner, who proceeded to remediate the situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask the planning Director, through you, sir, if there has been an application made to him for removal of the material excavated for the purposes of building that road, to remove that from the site, or to crush it, to get it, to have it crushed.
Mr. Chairman, at present, we do not have any applications to remove the material from site. That was one of the areas that was noted during the visit by the compliance officer, and the parties were advised that the material had to be returned to site.
Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I know the director can't have someone there every day. It's virtually impossible. But is it possible that it can be more often than they do? Because it appears like there are efforts being made to do exactly what they were not given permission for. And I'm wondering if there's any way we can make those visits more often, or if there's some process through which the people who are there or see something can reach someone to tell them when this is going, or maybe we can survey those piles and get the exact measurement of it. And Mr. Chairman, I really don't want to put poor old Mr. Pandu on the spot, because we really shouldn't have to do this with a developer. But I guess the people you're dealing with, no?
Mr. McLean, is there a question or a suggestion?
Asking, yeah.
Is there a suggestion for a procedure to be implemented?
No. I'm asking him if there is some way that those visits can be more frequent, or is there a process, a mechanism through which people can report the people from, this not Health City, it is, what name is that? Mr. Joe Emperado. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Pandohi.
Mr. Chairman, I can give an undertaking that we will step up the visits by the compliance officer to the site, and with any breach of planning control, members of the public are free to contact the department or one of our compliance officers to report it, and we will then action and investigate the matter.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to vote on these two appropriations. All those in favor of PAH 13, provision of planning services for All those in favor of PAH 13, provision of planning services for $72,212, and PAH 14, management of planning applications for $2,792,822 standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. PAH 15, Administration of Temporary Housing Initiative, $56,272, found on page 143 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to know, is this the ones by Jose? John Silvers? But I thought the Deputy Premier was using that now for school? And there's still got people in there? Okay.
I like that, owner. Okay.
What? PAH 15. Yeah. Are there any questions on PAH 15? All those in favor of PAH 15, Administration of Temporary Housing Initiative, 56,000. 272,000. Standing prior to schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. PAH 16, licensing of drivers and vehicles, $224,576, found on page 144 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
To you, I only have one question. Why is the person who opens a door dressed as a security officer? And what is his role in the organization, and how much does it cost?
PAH 16, page 144.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that as a matter of policy, the DVDL, like most other government departments, as part of the precautionary measure to protect government assets, has a security officer at the entrance to the Department of Vehicle and Driver's Licensing, who pretty well make sure that the process which is gone through by clients of that department is done in an orderly fashion.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what equipment does this person have to offer security for government assets on the location?
Mr. Chairman, the equipment that that officer has is much the same as any of the other security officers that by law are allowed to carry. It certainly doesn't include firearms, but it would just simply include the basics. And so that we can have it very clear, it's not by any stretch of the imagination meant for that security officer to be prepared for any situation which may arise, but more than anything else, to the point of any unruly conduct, but certainly not to the point of anything that would endanger people's lives.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a request of your department or your ministry? I would like to have a compilation of what these security officers are costing in all of these government buildings and what purpose are they serving. I wasn't here for because it seems to me that they spend more time, I guess what they believe is helping the customer as opposed to having a security role. I've even seen the extreme case in the postal department at the packages at the airport where the security officer, who's normally at the door, was behind the counter processing people's applications for packages. And that, to me, I believe, is a certain risk to government. If you go to immigration, as soon as you step in the door, they offer to tell you how to operate the machine. They don't ask you whether you can read or write or not. I went to Davis, and the man insisted that I needed a ticket. I said, I don't need a ticket. You must know you have to have a ticket. And the man harassed me for 15 minutes that I needed a ticket, and when the gentleman that I was waiting on came to see me, I looked at him and said, see, I didn't need a ticket, right? But even though they pretend to be helpful, I think it's a cost that government needs. Same thing at the government administration building. When you walk in there, I mean, there's more security there than there's anything. For what? And what are their role and what are they expected to do? I simply assume they stand up to the door because they're going to be the first ones to leave if anything happens. Because I don't know.
All right. Is there a question, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I need your department to get me that figure, please.
We are undertaking to do that. We will provide it for you as soon as we are able to. Are there any further questions with respect to PAH 16? Mr. McLean?
No, it wasn't that, Mr. Chairman. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
All right. All those in favor of PAH 16, licensing of drivers and vehicles, $224,576, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. And just for the sake of full disclosure, the note on this particular output, PAH 16, it says the total cost of supplying this output is $2,347,527. However, revenue of $2,122,951 from third parties reduces the cost to Cabinet to $224,576.
Which one are you doing now, ERA 12?
Yes, sir. Turning now to consider appropriation ERA 12, support to National Energy Policy Secretariat, $15,000, found on page 146 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Let me get it.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that, but I couldn't allow this one to pass, even though I know my good friend is going to be able to answer.
I have a question.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder where we are with our energy policy. What's the status with that?
Mr. Chairman, there is a draft energy policy which had actually, if memory serves me right, it went to Cabinet before this government took office. I think Cabinet actually approved it, but no action was taken. Where we are now is that policy itself is being reviewed, and we have undertaken, and we actually undertook a little while back to get public feedback from stakeholders and otherwise. And we are now in the process of arranging that so that we can facilitate that dialogue. I have to admit that with a million other things going on, it has not been one that has been in the fore, but other circumstances have caused it now to come to the fore, and I'm certain that ministry staff and the other technocrats involved will start the process forward to get that public input so that we can, as a government, agree whether we want the policy that was approved prior to us being in government be the same policy, or if there are any amendments that we would wish to put in place. I think that's about it for now with regards to any information that I can give, Mr. Chairman. I hope that suffices.
Mr. Chairman, the minister say other circumstances have now brought it to the fore. Would that other circumstance be something about bulk fuel?
No. No. No.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman,
what I was really speaking to is the debate on renewables and that kind of stuff that's been going on in recent times.
Mr. Chairman,
You wait till-
Mr. Bush, before I take your question, I just want to say to Mr. Tibbetts, Mr. Tibbetts, I see some of your staff or some of your support staff have left. Just want to make sure that you will not need them for any of these other appropriations. You're okay without them for
Yeah.
these? Okay, perfect.
You mean the capital?
Yes.
Yeah. No, we're all right.
Without them, perfect. Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, want to ask the minister whether there are any plans for the ERA to develop an RFP for solar energy for
Mr.
residential.
Chairman, this is not the section for that.
Well, wherever you want me to ask it, I thought on the...
I'm not being funny, but I mean,
No, not.
this is only regarding an energy policy, and
I thought that would be a good place to ask it, but anyway.
if you want us to get it out of the way, then
Yes, I do like...
I don't have a problem doing that.
Well, what I was asking whether there's any plans for the ERA to develop an RFP for solar energy for residential and commercial, seeing that a FIT program was developed, and I believe there was a price structure for residential and commercial put in place by the ERA some time ago. So I don't know whether they've got to a point whether they can go for an RFP or whether there's a lot more work yet to be done on it. I was asking, I don't know whether you're to the point whether you can do an RFP on it or you intend to do an RFP on it. I know there was some distance to it, but where are we with it now?
Mr. Chairman, the managing director will respond.
Mr. Chairman, Charles Farrington, Managing Director, Electricity Regulatory Authority. Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do have the feed-in tariff plan in place, and it is taking hold. There's a fair bit of uptake. A few years back, the ERA gave CUC the go-ahead to do an RFP for utility-sized solar. Unfortunately, that has not come to fruition at this point in time. And at this point in time, the ERA and CUC are discussing commissioning a study really to see just how much and how fast solar energy can penetrate the grid. And I anticipate that once we get that sort of roadmap in place, because when we're talking about solar energy, it's something where the technology is changing rapidly, and so the cost is changing rapidly. So to my mind, one of the questions we need to ask is, just when do we make long-term commitments to solar energy? But I anticipate down the road, I don't know if it'll be later this year, because right now we're running the firm solicitation, but certainly into next year, I would anticipate that the ERA would be in a position to run a renewables RFP, and most likely that would be solar.
And Mr. Chairman, and you're saying that the ERA and CUC is doing a study.
Mr. Chairman, through you, we're discussing doing a study. We're talking about the scope of it at the moment, the scope of that study.
And it has to be CUC that you discuss that with, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair, through you, we haven't decided that we would do it that way. They came to us saying they wanted to do it, and we said, fine, we want to do it as well, so maybe we can cooperate. But it depends on agreeing on the scope. We don't have to do it with them. We can do it on our own.
Are they predominantly, their production is based on petroleum, and I trying to understand why you would want them to do the study or to be involved with the ERA doing a study.
Mr. Chairman, they are concerned about the technical issues of introducing large amounts of solar energy onto the grid, because solar is somewhat intermittent, and so there are technical considerations about the stability of the grid that they need to know before we decide on just how much can be added to the grid. So it's nothing to do with their diesel production. This is to do with renewable energy.
No, I understand that, but I have my own reasons why I'm asking whether you'd want them doing this study, but I understand what you're saying. The study is in connection with the grid and not whether solar is needed or be something the country would pursue. That's what you're saying. Am I, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, that's basically correct. Yes.
Technically, whether the grid can handle it, but not whether the country wants to go into solar energy. That's not what you're asking them to study.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Right.
Technically, how much solar can be added to the grid without destabilizing the grid? That's their interest. And they may also have an interest in seeing more solar added to the grid if it can be done more cheaply, because if we can bring down the cost of electricity, they might sell more. So it's in their interest as well.
I don't know they're going to sell more, but at least we want our prices to go down. the president won. And so I think what the manager said is that you see possibilities if once you get a study done, you'll know. That's what I want to be clear on. The path now to get, if you're going out for an RFP, seeing that the FIT program was developed. So I thought you said earlier, Mr. Chairman, that you would be going out for an RFP, but after the study. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that is what I said. The FIT is a consumer program, small amounts, but an RFP would be for large utility scale. And some of the decisions we need to be making is, how best to introduce that. I mean, one of the things about solar is that the more distributed it is, perhaps the more you can add to the grid. So you have to craft the RFP to make sure that you achieve those goals of having it well distributed, having it cheap enough to reduce the cost of electricity, meaning well distributed throughout the island geographically, so that if it's raining in the north side and you got a solar array in West Bay, it's still producing. You don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, I recognize that about it. All right, Mr. Chairman, I was looking at what was on the web. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, you had a question, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to, the minister talked about the policy statement that Cabinet had approved, energy policy statement that the Cabinet had approved prior to his arrival in Cabinet. I really don't know if that was a energy policy. It was it wasn't fit for purpose, I know that. Not me. It was my hope and my dream, as Mr. Farrington can tell you, to do that and to form a utilities commission as well. But the one that I saw come here, that had went to Cabinet, wasn't fit for purpose. There is a need for an energy policy, yes. You said it was being reviewed. Will the ERA put up another committee and review this in its entirety and come up with a policy that we can use.
Mr. Chairman, that, sir, is the entire intent. And as I said before, I have to admit that it was not in the fore because there were so many other things that we were dealing with. But once we get over this budget process, that will be one of the first actions that we will take to ensure we get a proper review done, we get stakeholders to be able to give their input, and then we develop a policy. What I didn't want to do was to simply discard what was done prior to this, but rather to use that not to be tainted by its content, but to use it as a base to work from, get the necessary input, get the technocrats to give their input, and then to utilize the agencies to create a policy that is not only sensible but sustainable, and then to move forward and table it after Cabinet's approval in the Legislative Assembly and begin to act it out, so to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. Mr. McLean, is there another question?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the managing director said that they were looking at a study to see the inclusion into the grid. I wonder if the director can tell us whether or not he has a ballpark as to how much megawatts he is talking about, or would that come out in the study?
Mr. Chairman, through you, that is exactly what we're looking for in the study. We started off with a very conservative figure of 15 megawatts, and now we want to see just how much further we could potentially stretch that. And I think you have to think about it in terms of the current spinning reserve that the CUC operates, which is around 20 megawatts. So, you wouldn't want to be at risk of more than that. However, we have to think about solar energy also in terms of having storage and perhaps being able to push the envelope further with some storage, but storage is new and expensive. And that's what I was talking about when I talked about, having a time frame, seeing how and when we can implement this and get more solar energy, but it only makes sense getting it if it's cheaper than the cost of the fossil fuel that we're burning.
Mr. Chairman, the storage, I don't know recently if you have gone in to look at it. Obviously you have found some storage someplace, batteries someplace. But I understand the cycling of those are losing the anodes on them and burning them up. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think that is correct. It's a new technology, and manufacturers are saying, making representations that they can last 20 years, but when they're putting them in the field, the cycling is bringing that down, and so you might set out to spend 10 million, but you might end up spending 20 million. So those are the things that we have to deal with.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the MD for that, and it's necessary that these things be placed in record and the public understands what it is. And I know a lot of the public may not understand when we start talking in those technical terms, but still they'll understand that it's the batteries that we are having problems with. We don't have problems with the solar panels, but they can only work during the day, during the time it's sun. We need to store that power and the batteries that you use to store that power, the technology has not been developed yet. And people needs to know that. You're going to be able to use the solar probably at its peak about 4 hours out of the day. Maximum you're going to get out of it. The rest of it, it's either coming up to that peak or going down off that peak. And therein lies our problem with solar, and why it cannot be considered firm power. And if we go more than the spinning reserves that the MD talked about, we could very well be shutting off buildings in Georgetown on any day that it's overcast. Somebody would have to decide which building we shut off unless we reserve 1 or 2 generators up there for it, and then you would be paying double. So people need to understand that before they start coming out about putting in 60 megawatts one place or the other on our grid.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of ERA 12, support the National Energy Policy Secretariat for $15,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Turning now to consider ICT appropriations. ICT 8, drafting instruction for the development of legislation, $30,532, found on page 147 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. Miller?
Through you to the Minister. Mr. Minister, last year, the former director of the ICTA took the view, and he said that his board took the view that they had no responsibility for content monitoring or enforcement of any standards for content. I wonder if the minister has determined whether there's any need to amend the legislation or policies in order to give the public some comfort that the ICTA is in fact doing some monitoring of the radio waves and the quality of the content on the TV channels.
Mr. Chairman, the new managing director is going to be answering the question.
You done?
Mr. Chairman, Ali Faumoy, Managing Director, ICTA. Mr. Chairman, you'll forgive a bit of reticence here, not just because I'm new, this being day 11, but because the last time the MD for the ICTA came to Finance Committee, it did not end well for him.
Oh, very well. We're getting to that next.
This MD takes a very different view towards the role that the ICTA should play in terms of content. I met with the board for the first time last week. We're concerned about content as it relates to the radio waves. We plan to convene a series of working groups to study issues and to make rules and regulations to govern various aspects of the industry, including obscenity on the radio. I have not yet met with all the licensees, including the radio stations. I've met with most of the telcos last week, but part of our discussions with the radio stations shall be how they propose to self-regulate, and if they cannot, will not, or won't for some reason self-regulate, we will regulate them.
To you, Mr. Chairman, you've had a chance to look at the ICTA law, and do you agree that the sections in there, particularly on offenses, give you latitude and responsibility to prosecute those licensees who do not, who break the offenses?
Broadly, Mr. Chairman, broadly, yes. However, over the 10, 11-year lifespan of the ICT, the authority has not developed the regulations that it is permitted to develop under the law in order to give it the power it needs to enforce specific rules against licensees for specific violations. So what we intend to do is study where we can make the regulations that we are empowered to make under the law through the board, and where we find that we don't have the power that we need, recommend changes to the law. But I don't believe that we're powerless.
So you intend to change the previous policy, which was that anybody who contravened the law, all responsibility for prosecution and all responsibility of concerned individuals was a matter for the police.
In some cases, Mr. Chairman, in some cases, violations are, depending what type of violation it is, are up to the RCIPS and the DPP to pursue and prosecute. In other instances, I believe there is latitude within the law to enable the regulator, the ICTA, to act.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister. I may have missed something this morning, but I found on my desk after lunch the action that was taken by the chief officer against Mr. Archibald's activities here last year. And I believe that what I asked for was a report saying what disciplinary action was going to be taken against Mr. Archibald for his obvious breaching of the parliamentary and I find this what I would call, Mr. Chairman, a reward as opposed to punishment. Rather perturbing that a person came here, in my view, committed perjury. We sent him to get the documentation. He came back. He tried to misquote the documentation to defend his perjury, and in the final analysis, he admitted that he had committed perjury, and we gave him 3 months' salary as a reward and sent him home? Is this all that happened? No disciplinary action was taken against Mr. Archibald other than what's in this letter to the chief officer?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry that Mr. Miller wasn't here this morning when the matter was dealt with. I had suggested that it be dealt with during this time, but it was decided by others that it should have been dealt with then. What the end result was is what the letter says. The fact is that what may well have been perceived as a problem at that time no longer exists as a problem. I will not try to argue against what the member is saying. All I can say is that, in my view, there is nothing more to be gained from the situation, because the end game is where it should be now. And I am, again, as I said, I'm not going to argue what the members' views are on the matter. All I know is for the operations of the ICTA, we are in much better stead now than we were before. We do not have the problem to face us on a daily basis and to deal with anymore. And I would hope that after ventilation, that we can simply move on, because really there's nothing else for me to do at this point in time. And I think what has been done at the end of the day is what is the end result that we wanted to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. Mr. Miller, in all fairness, we did discuss this particular point at great length this morning, hence the reason that the copy of the letter to Mr. Archibald was circulated, and to reiterate that the letter was drafted and vetted by the legal department before delivery to Mr. Archibald. So I'm not sure what we might gain by going over this ground again, unless there was something that you thought you might be able to extract that was new, but we spent quite a bit of time on it this morning. Mr. McLean insisted that we do so this morning.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be guided by you, and I'll reserve the rest of my questions on this solution for the Attorney General and DPP, because I would really like to know what legal authority the chief officer used in paying somebody a 3-month contract who had no contract. But I'll talk to the Attorney General when he comes onto the DPP, because I wrote them both December last year, and I haven't heard, as my grandmother said, "Teheh," about it. And it is time that this country deal with white-collar crime and deal with it properly, and just don't worry about the little burglar and stuff that's going on in my community, and the person that's getting 6 conks out of the Marine Park is prosecuted readily. But these people seem to be immune from prosecution.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We will consider the remaining appropriations together before we take any further questions. So, along with ICT 8, we will also consider ICT 9, management of KY internet domain for $120,062, found on page 148. ICT 10, collection and verification of license fees, $100,383, found on page 149. ICT 11, policy advice on ICT matters, $43,757, found on page 150. ICT 12, education of local businesses and the general public on ICT issues, $8,215, found on page 151. ICT 13, regional and international representation, $42,602, found on page 152. Are there any questions on all of those appropriations? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've been hearing so much and getting so many BBMs. I had emails I had on get rid of them things about this local content on TV. Now, as a minister, it was my understanding that all of those providers, ICT providers, when the license, as a matter of fact, I extended one, when the license were issued, there's a provision in there for them to provide local content. Now, time has moved on. I understand that. But certainly, there's also a need. The need for local content remains. It stays here. Now we're out there canvassing the country as to what is local content, how much it should be, where it should be, what. I'm just up to my eyebrows in that. The fact is that the ICTA board needs to enforce those licenses. How they do it, I don't care. It may be an amalgamation of all of them, their local side, and they tag it differently for the different stations, but they must provide it. You know, some of them are avoiding it by just going up there and pulling stuff down. It's cheap and they can sell it on. The local content is a little more expensive, because of production and what have you and what have you and what have you. But where do they think they were operating? It's in the Cayman Islands. Now, I need to know from the director if he has bought in to this rubbish about no local content or the reduction. The reduction. Mr. Minister, you're looking at me, you got a vested interest or what? I hope not. That they want to reduce the time. I think it was one channel 24 hours a day, and now they're talking about maybe 2 hours and 3 hours, and that last one he wanted to reduce it as well. I want to know if you have bought into that.
Mr. Chairman, through you. I think we can all agree that local TV plays an important role in informing our communities, in keeping them educated and abreast of what's happening in this body, in this chamber, as well as with emergencies and whatnot. I don't think any of the licensees disagree with that. The question is, how do we deliver it? It was going to be one of the top priorities when I took the role, and it remains one of the top priorities. Unfortunately, a number of other things have jumped to the forefront. We have found, for example, that in the rush to get fiber deployed out to communities, licensees are fighting for space on CUC's light poles. We have concerns about safety, about grounding, about electrical interference, about safety to workers and to the general public. So we have to address, of all the issues that we're faced with, we have to address the ones that impact health and safety first. So the first two working groups that we're going to establish with the industry starting this week have to do with safety and standardization. Within 60 days, we will establish another working group to come up with the rules around local content, what it means, where it comes from, who gets it, how long, what periods of the day, et cetera, et cetera. And within 90 days of that working group being established, we will have several options, we will make a ruling, we will move on with our lives.
Mr. Chairman, I should ask the managing director, I don't recall what provisions are in those licenses for who managed those licenses after they were signed, but they were all signed by Cabinet. Now, I don't know if Cabinet has in that license, the minister might remember whether we delegated the authority to them after the signing thereof. Because remember, when I signed CUC license, it went on to ERA to manage those licenses and amend and renegotiate those licenses, or is it now still Cabinet? Because the authority mightn't be in a position to deal with that. There were certain provisions put in those licenses. Now I don't know what it is. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the authorities should be looking at telling these people that how, not how or when, but they must provide local content. They need to come back to the ICTA with a plan to deal with this, because it's not the ICTA responsibility to sit down and determine the amount, what the content, the what have you. It's their responsibility with the approval of the ICTA.
But they all come in with different plans, you see, that's the problem.
Well, they need more.
Every one of them comes with a different one, so that's why the ICTA has to be doing it in the manner that they speak to.
Well, that's good. Then they all do the different plan as long as they do all of it, all of it. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, just let me ask, because since we're doing all of these, the collection and verification of license fee, are all of those collection up to date? I know you're just new, you might have that information.
The bigger ones are, Mr. Chairman, are up to date with their license fees. There have been in the past one or two of our smaller licensees who have fallen behind for a short period of time, in some cases a long period of time, a few years back. But the vast majority of our licensees are current with their license fee payments, if that's what you're referring to.
And the percentage on the gross and that kind of stuff.
Mr. Chairman, there is a provision in the license for licensees to be subject to an audit of their financial statements to verify, as the member is pointing out, that the percentage of their revenues payable to the ICTA as their license fee is an accurate representation of their revenues. We have not enforced this provision in the licenses up until now, and we are now doing so.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we mightn't have to give them so much money if we enforce that, you see? That we may not have to buy so much stuff from them if we enforce that. But, Mr. Chairman, I find that a little disturbing, though, that there may be some of the licensees that are not paying their license fees. Find that a little disturbing. Then my last question is, this is a tough one though, but the separation on that radio FM band, we messed that up. And some of those are, the ones that are left are too close, like 2%, I believe. 2 megahertz or something like that apart. Or some of them are like 3, and we should be 4 to provide that separation or something. But it was messed up. The last managing director messed it up. Now, there are a few channels left there that we can't use now. One of the things we were hoping on was to realign them, but you know what that's going to mean? People are going to have to change their frequencies. The 104 and the 108 and 9.9 and what have you. May I saddle you with that responsibility to try and see if these people will readjust their frequencies so that we can get more out of that band and we'll get more stations. I think we would have gotten like 4 or 5 more if we realign them all. Because you remember what happened, Radio Cayman stood alone there, and then we tried doing it, and by the time we get to the end of the frequency band, they were too tight. I would beg that you look at that and see what we can do about it, because we would have to shift it up and people would have to have a different frequency, and people make their preferences, which is what they're 101.9 Rooster, but maybe if I would beg that you look at that, Mr. MD.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Miller, you had a question, sir?
Through you to the minister. My understanding, when a particular TV license were given in the late 80s, early 90s, the government required at least one channel, 24/7, local content, free to the population. Is the government considering changing that policy for new applicants who provide TV?
Mr. Chairman, can I seek some clarification on the question? Is the member asking?
This question is to the minister, because this is a policy position. The policy, as I understood it, when we gave CITN and others the their license in the early 90s, late 80s, a requirement of that license was that the licensee had to provide one channel, 24/7, local content available free to the population. Is the government proposing to change that policy now and allow the new TV stations or providers that come online to provide a lesser amount and not free to the cable companies?
Mr. Chairman, if you remember what the managing director said about determining certain policies, let me say this first of all. There will not be a policy which shows at any point in time that the playing field is not level. The playing field has to be level. I cannot say that what Mr. Miller has just said and the way he described it when CITN was given a license, I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm saying I'm not sure that everything that he said is exactly how it was, and that there was something cast in stone about one free channel, 24/7, and stuff like. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I don't know that to be a fact. Where the determination has to arrive is, do we need for every provider to provide a separate and distinct channel to give free coverage 24/7 to the public? Is it sensible, logical, and sustainable for that to happen, to ensure that there is sufficient quality content, that it will be different in all respects? Or is it going to be the same thing seen over and over on a different channel at a different time during the course of the day? Those are the potential pitfalls that have to be looked at. So it is not about giving any other new providers an advantage over what obtains presently or what obtained initially, but it is about creating a situation which benefits the public most and which will give the best results, but make sure that everybody's tab is the same by way of the provision.
But let me give you an example so you can understand my concern. People in my community right now who don't have cable,
right,
can get 27 free.
And we understand that.
Okay. People who have Lime TV cannot see the government channel. The only how you can see the government channel
the
free
Lime is to subscribe.
because that is done with Westar. The only how you can see the government channel is if you have Westar equipment. Now, I don't see why it is not possible for us to maintain the position that they must carry the local content.
I know that.
And whether they contract with CITN, who has the production mechanism, as they do now with HBO. But I believe that we should stick to the policy. My position is we should stick to the policy that each of the providers must carry that level playing field, which is already established. Any change to that playing field now is going to make it uneven for those who have invested all that money to production mechanism to produce TV, including the government. But so if you can keep it level, it has to be level where it is.
But and I understand your point. And on the one side of the coin, makes all the sense in the world. How sustainable that is another question. Is there enough content to have 6 different stations that are government stations that are running 24/7?
No, you're misunderstanding me.
Sorry.
What I'm saying is that right now, I don't think it is sustainable if you tell each one they have to put up their production.
That is exactly my point.
But they must carry the channel. They must carry the content. So it is to their business then to go and do what CITN, which has the production mechanism, what they do with HBO and TBC and TNN and CNN and whatever, they paid him to provide their channel, but I don't need to have 4 boxes in my room to get local TV.
I hear your point.
So all of,
Yeah,
that
yes,
makes
I
sense. In
understand.
my view, that maintains the level playing field.
And I'm saying to you that that's part and parcel of the look-see that the managing director has spoken about to determine what is the most equitable policy to come up with. But I can assure you that in all of this, the consumer is foremost with regards to any cost involved. So as little as is paid now, there is no expectation for any more to be paid for them to have the privilege, and that everybody who provides the services and who has a license will be providing the same level of services. And I hear your point. I was crossing up a little bit. I think we were on the same page, and I thought we were on different pages. I don't know if the managing director has any more comment with that.
Just 2 points, Mr. Chairman. First, the government channel is actually available on 2 providers. Westar does get a feed from CIG TV, and Logic gets a feed as well. At the moment, they are not the same company. They have been in the past. But they have 2 separate connections into the studios at Government Administration Building, and they each feed their own cable TV systems with the CIG signal. Now, the others do not at this. No, I don't think so. But they, because it's different on their different systems. But to the member's point, there's a difference between free access to a TV channel that is broadcast over the air and access to a free TV channel that's part of your cable box subscription. Those are very different things and very different requirements. And I think to your original point, to the member's original point, the requirement that was on the original licensee, Cayman 27, was that if they provided cable TV, they had to do a free over-the-air channel as well, which was the channel 27. The question that the industry is grappling with is, no matter what's in the license, does it make sense for us to all build our own individual radio stations broadcasting over the air in addition to building cable systems carried over fiber? Where are we going to get the content from if we even do build all these stations? That speaks to sustainability that the member was speaking of. So all of these things need to be addressed by the industry, and they need to come up with our guidance, a sustainable solution that meets our objectives as a community and a society, meets objectives that they have under their licenses, and is financially sustainable for them to continue to provide.
I don't see the difference if it's free in a cable box or it's free over the air. If Lime has a free channel that I'm not paying for out of the 22 or 32 or 79 or 110 that I suspect is still free.
The difference, Mr. Chairman, is that if they don't broadcast over the air, the only way for you to see that channel is to buy a subscription from their cable system. And the other issue then is, do we require them to broadcast NTSC analog or HD digital? It's going to be more and more difficult for people to find an analog TV, much like it's going to be difficult to find an incandescent light bulb soon. So how do we address that as well?
As long as the ICT addresses the geographical distance, like to be reminded of me so often, bridge going in certain directions, you can't drive there. All of these are doing a lot of stuff around Georgetown, but they ain't doing nothing north, side, and east end.
As someone who grew up in Cayman, Mr. Chairman, I am very sensitive to that particular issue.
Mr. Chairman, Cayman has 2 representatives out there. They can speak for themselves. North side only got 1.
Mr. McLean, you have a question, sir?
Yes, sir. And I'm going to a little different thing. Mr. Chairman, through you to the managing director. last year we were told, after I questioned the termination cost of mobiles, that they were all the same. Can you confirm that for me, please?
For clarification, is the member referring to mobile termination rate, LAN to mobile calls?
Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about across the board. Mobile to mobile, mobile to fixed, fixed to mobile.
I would have to verify what those rates are, but I suspect that they differ from carrier to carrier depending on the plan that you're on. So for example, if you're with a particular mobile provider and you're calling one of their, a subscriber who's also on their network, you might be paid a very different rate than you would if you were calling a fixed line, depending on the plan.
Okay, maybe I confused that whole thing. I'm talking about from one provider to the other.
Interconnection.
And vice versa.
Between the networks?
Between the two separate networks, are they equal?
I cannot say with any certainty. I can undertake to get that answer for you.
Because I know in the interest of liberalization, one was extremely higher than the other. And I tried getting the board to change that. And it is time, if they're not, that they be equalized. There should never have been a difference between them anyway, but the unsuspecting, uninitiated customer would run to the provider, a new one, because they think they were getting it cheaper, not knowing that their termination into their friend at the other provider was 3 times the amount that their friend was calling that provider that they were on. And that's wrong. It was something with like 8 to 27 cents or 24 or something like that. Now, I don't know if it's the same still, but I would respectfully ask that you look into that and give us a commitment to provide that to the members of this parliament in writing.
If there are no further questions, and all those in favor of ICTA 8, drafting instructions for the development of legislation, $30,532. ICT 9, management of KY internet domain, $120,062. ICT 10, collection and verification of license fees, $100,383. ICT 11, policy advice on ICT matters, $43,757. ICT 12, education of local businesses and the general public on ICT issues, $8,215. ICT 13, regional and international representation, $42,602, standing part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Turning now to consider NHT 4, Administration of Affordable Housing Initiative, $145,535, found on page 153 of the annual plan and estimates. And we will consider, along with NHT 4, we will also consider NHT 5, Administration of the Government Guaranteed Home Assistance Mortgage, Assisted Mortgage, $231,035, found on page 154. NHT 6, Administration of the New Affordable Housing Initiative, $204,035, found on page 155 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know the minister in his contribution to the debate last week sometime spoke of this, and then I heard him and the chairman on the radio prior to that. Mr. Chairman, can the minister tell us if we have fully moved back to the methods of providing homes for affordable homes for Caymanians, as was the intent initially? That is, they own the home as opposed to rent to own the homes.
Mr. Chairman, as a matter of policy, that is the case. There are certain specific circumstances which exist as we find them, which we have to work through by way of some people who occupy might not be able to qualify for a mortgage for themselves, while we got, forgive the term, but we will understand it, while we got cross-threaded with the mix-up of simply renting. So while trying to safeguard people's financial interest in the homes, because there were all kinds of concoctions. There were straight rentals, there were leases, there were lease to own, and they're going through all of that as we speak to try to get to the point where whatever equity may be salvaged for individuals can be done, and then it might take a while for some of them to graduate to the point of them being able to get their own mortgage, but you're simply not pushing them beyond the limits which they have. So it's a gradual process which they're working through. In the meantime, for instance, the 20 homes that were built in Bodden Town will no longer, from the very beginning, be rented, but rather they will revert, and the team, that the subcommittee from the board have already been vetting all of the applications that they have with a view to sending qualified applicants through the system to see who qualifies best for mortgages, so that those 20 homes can be had and sold, which will give the trust sufficient funding to move on to continue to build. So I hope that that satisfies the member with the question that you had regarding where we are now. And also I forgot to say, just so that the member will know, the GG Ham program that was in place, we are in the final stages of making agreement with the banks. We're wanting to add credit union and HSBC to the program that existed prior to this. Once we can get final agreement, we will sign new arrangements with these institutions and get that program up and going again.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I hear the minister. I trust that it will work out. A couple of questions. If you can, where are all those investigations that were being conducted on the last board?
Mr. Chairman, I am being truthful. I can't answer that. I don't know. I can find out, and I certainly don't have a problem advising the member once I can make the determination, but I don't know the answer to the question offhand.
Well, I know as a fact, a number of them were reported to the anti-corruption of malfeasance in office. So we will, some of them may be sub judice as well.
I was just about to say, if the member will allow, I've just gotten to understand that there actually is a court trial.
Yeah, but only one.
No, I understand. So that one would be sub judice.
Right.
The others I don't know the answer to, but I will determine and revert back to the member as soon as I get the information.
I'm talking about the investigation, the increase in the
I understand. Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Okay. The stipend or what is the per meeting or that kind of stuff. Now, Mr. Chairman, there are 12 homes in East End. The majority of those homes need extensive repairs. Tiles lift up, walls cracked. Please acknowledge, and the legs. The corporation has not been responding as needed. Can the minister tell us when the people there can expect to get some response from the corporation?
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, I want to make sure that I understand. You have 8 houses that have been bought by individuals, which they own. And you're asking if those houses need repairing now, and you're saying that NHDT is responsible for that? Is that, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Yeah, because there got to be some consumer protection on that. I mean, it can't go in 3-4 years that the tiles lift up and the cabinets and the this and the that.
Well, I don't know those details.
Yeah,
and I will make the determination on those details. And certainly, if in fairness that is something that should be dealt with, then I will make sure that it is dealt with. But it's brand new to me.
Well,
just letting you know. I know the other 3 that are now for sale the repairs have been completed, but I will make, that's what I'm told. But the determination of those that are occupied, I will have to speak to the chairman, find out exactly what the situation is, and make a determination. But I can assure you that it will be a fair determination to those owners of the homes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, from time the owners went in there, they had complaints about certain workmanship. And my understanding is that the cooperation was notified. The housing corporation was notified.
As I said, it's new NEW to me. I will find out and certainly revert back to the member, but I will make sure that whatever is fair is what happens, because I didn't know anything about it.
And the manager of the unit does not know either?
What he's speaking to me about is the same thing I asked you about, who's responsible. And I think that's a matter of policy, so I will make that determination. He's not going to be able to make that determination, is what I'm saying to you.
Mr. McLean, it appears that we will not complete the questions on this particular group of appropriations tonight. And we did planned to adjourn at 8 p.m. this evening. It's now 5 minutes to 8, according to the clock in the chamber. So that's 5 minutes slow. So in other words, it's already 8 p.m. somewhere. So,
Sunrise
so if everyone is in agreement, we will adjourn for the evening and return on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And we will gather here before
Mr.
10
Chairman,
a.m.
please.
in order that we can start at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Mr. Tibbetts.
No, I'm not pushing if members need to do that. But Mr. Chairman, please, I crave your indulgence, sir. On page 156,
Yes, sir.
there is an NGS 24, which would, if we can get rid of him, then that would simply leave us into the capital domain.
Sure. All right. NGS 24, spaying and neutering of dogs and cats, 18,600. All those in favor of NGS 24, spaying and neutering of dogs and cats, 18,600. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
So we will adjourn for the evening and resume proceedings on Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. And I would ask that we gather here before 10 a.m. in order we can start at 10 a.m. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.